Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe with you here once again for your February long range forecast update. And boy, we have a lot of winter to talk about, at least in the near term, as far as this forecast is concerned. So if you haven't had enough of that, well, I've got more of that queued up for you. And for some of us, that winter weather could obviously be significant. So let's talk about things. First of all, in terms of who's been seeing moisture and who hasn't been seeing moisture. And it's been basically these same areas really from northeast Colorado right down here through Kansas, parts of the Mississippi Valley. This quadrant of the country has actually been doing okay. It's just areas to the north, Wyoming, western Nebraska, parts of the desert Southwest, certainly Southwest Texas. That's where they haven't been seeing moisture. And this is a drought indicator. So it's cumulative over the past several months or so. If you want to see who's been seeing moisture recently, well, here it is. And keep in mind, a lot of that moisture that took place from eastern Colorado, west and southwest Kansas, through the panhandles, down into eastern New Mexico and west Texas, occurred back in the fall. Since then, we have been dealing with a lot of dry weather for some of us. In fact, really, you could draw a line here along I-70 from Denver all the way out here across Kansas, and areas along and north of that have been doing okay. Areas to the south, southwest Kansas, southeast Colorado, south central Kansas has not been doing well. The panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas, eastern New Mexico, and look at down here, southwest Texas, right down through southern portions of New Mexico. Those are zeros. This is a map that indicates the 30-day precip anomaly in terms of percent of normal. Those areas with the zeros have been completely shut out for the past 30 days or so. So there have been a lot of dry areas across most of the plains, including, areas of southern Kansas where, every mile you get farther east, things actually look better. But this area, southern Kansas, western Oklahoma, down in the southwest part of the country has been rotten in terms of moisture around as of late. So let's look and see if that's going to change over the next 2 weeks. And this weather pattern that I'm going to show you has winter written all over it. This first graphic starts on Friday, February 14th. So I'm recording this video the afternoon of the 13th. So I'm looking ahead toward tomorrow morning, and I have my eye on this trough of low pressure out here to the west, okay? And also this up here across southern Canada. These two are going to kind of work in tandem and slingshot disturbances and cold air around them over the next 7 days. So this first animation that I'm going to show you runs from the 14th through the 21st, the next 7 days. So let's put it into motion, and you can see those blue blobs just rotating around themselves here as they make their way southward from Canada, at least through about the 19th. And then after that, the main energy starts to kick east. We'll let this play a couple of times, but you can see there's disturbance number one swinging through this weekend. Here comes the bigger, more significant disturbance number two coming through early to mid next week. And then it finally starts to get out of here. And the key to this pattern breaking would be if we could see a ridge of high pressure build across the western United States and kind of shut the door on this cold air mass that's coming to the south, but I just don't see that happening in the short term. In fact, if we look at forecast temperature anomalies coming up, all right, from Friday the 14th through Friday the 21st, look at these anomalies across Nebraska and Kansas. These things are pushing 15 to almost 30 degrees below average during that week time. I really think some of the most significant cold weather that we're going to see comes Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. And you can see nobody's really immune to this. This cold air mass is going to go all the way down into Texas and across the Gulf Coast. The key to this is how far west and southwest does this air mass make it? If it sets up here in the Central Plains, then areas here out west, it's not as bad. If it dives more like this, then areas farther west are going to end up being colder. The main takeaway from this is I have said at length that this pattern is very reminiscent of the pattern that we dealt with in February of 2021 when we saw that record-setting cold air mass come down from Canada and make its way all the way to the Gulf Coast. And it really caused a lot of problems, especially on the energy grid. Again, I'm not saying this particular event is going to mimic that event. I'm saying that the overall pattern is conducive to allow those types of air masses to come south, specifically this time of year. And we could potentially be seeing at least a piece of one of those coming up as we head into next week. So certainly something that I'm going to stay on top of, but certainly over the next 7 days, plan on colder weather than not. And that's especially true after we get past tomorrow, where some areas are actually going to be fairly mild. After we get past Friday, your Valentine's Day, things are not looking that great in the temperature department. In terms of precipitation, I really think those areas that have been seeing the moisture will still see the moisture. Up here across parts of Kansas, western Nebraska may get it a little bit, but farther south, this quadrant right here is still going to largely end up drier than average, as you have a better quadrant of moisture up here and a better quadrant of moisture over here. These areas from eastern New Mexico, West Texas, the Panhandle, Southwest Kansas, western Oklahoma, those areas are likely going to end up drier than average over the long haul over the next 7 days. And there could be some areas here across parts of Kansas that actually see some decent snow out of this. The problem with the snow that we will see next week, it is going to be dry, moistureless, fluffy snow. And it doesn't do a whole lot of good. It's certainly not going to be wet snow given the cold air mass. So let's look at the period of time beyond that 7 days. So we'll take you from the 21st through the 28th. So we'll basically do the last week of this month. On the 21st, we have a little ripple of energy that's kicking through here, but nothing significant. There's our main cold air and stormy producer that'll be out on the East Coast. But what I want you to look for here is again that building ridge of high pressure that's out here along the West Coast. And as we put this into motion, you will see it kind of flex itself here across the western half of the United States. That ridge will provide for not only warmer weather, but also drier weather as a whole across the entire region before the pattern will probably recycle itself. Because watch, this ridge moves in from the west and it flexes right here over the Great Basin. Okay. And then what happens? The ridge shifts farther east into that, and we get this guy to dig in again in the Pacific Northwest and along the west coast of Canada. Okay, so that ridge just simply hasn't had a whole lot of staying power in the grand scheme of things. It'll give us a few warm days in here, but again, I think the pattern will inevitably recycle itself potentially as we head into very early times in March. But the overall theme of the following 7 days, so like I said, the 21st through the 28th, the cold air shifts its way eastward, okay, like this, and we start to see warmer weather in these areas. Nebraska, along the Front Range of Colorado, New Mexico, West Texas, those areas will benefit the most from that ridge pushing in from the west. So if you can get through this next week, and in some parts of the area, it is going to be a little bit on the rough side temperature-wise, there's definitely hope on the way for that last week of February and possibly even into the first few days of March. As far as precipitation goes, like I said, when the ridge builds in, we slam the door here in the midsection of the country. So drier than average conditions everywhere you see brown. And I think really the majority of the region for that last week of February will likely see drier than average conditions across the board. Okay, so that's the next couple of weeks. That's also the potential liquid precipitation we could see out of this over the next 2 weeks as a whole. Okay, so this would be rain, melted snow, ice, whatever. And you can see we've got some moisture here across Kansas where we've been getting it. But this quadrant here, okay, I'm going to outline it for you. This quadrant here continues to get shut out, and everything materializes farther east. Okay, especially here across the Gulf Coast, the Mississippi and the Ohio Valley, the mountains of Colorado, they do okay. But the other areas that are in between are struggling. And that's especially true for the panhandles, all of eastern and most of New Mexico, to be honest, all of West Texas, western Oklahoma, everything gets shoved a little bit farther to the east. The winners with this, I really think, would be on a lineup here across central and eastern Kansas into Missouri in terms of snowfall. I think that's probably where the greater snowfall is going to pan out. But again, we'll have to see how things shake out over the next few days or so. Let's look at our friend La Nina and see what she's been up to. It's still kicking out here along the equator in the Central Pacific, okay? But we have seen some changes take place over the past few weeks or so, which I'll share with you. The other area that I'm watching are these three question marks that I have here from the Gulf of Alaska right down the west coast of North America. Those sea surface temperature anomalies and how they behave and change over the next couple of months or so are going to loom large in terms of what we can expect to see this summer in terms of weather, or late spring into summer. So that's an area that I'm going to be watching closely, not just what's going on with the La Nina down here along the equator. And in fact, if we track those temperature changes over the past 7 days, you do see a little bit of cooling that's taking place where you see the blue up here. There's also a little bit of warming on the western side of that circle. So basically about the same. But we've seen quite a bit of warming taking place down here along the equator in that La Nina region. And that is a sign that La Nina is going away. And we can track this La Nina all the way back into mid-November on this graphic. Anything below negative 0.5 for a period of time is technically La Nina threshold. Anything up here at positive 0.5, okay, or above would be El Nino. And we've obviously been way down here. We maxed out right around Christmas, okay? There's a little dip there. We also maxed out at the end of January, but since the end of January, we've been nothing but weakening this La Nina. You see that kind of coming up here on the right-hand side of the graphic. In fact, the latest value, okay, back where we maxed out in late January, we were at a negative 1.5 degrees Celsius out there. We've almost come up a full degree Celsius since that time. So the trend here is that La Nina is weakening. It may not completely go away as fast as what we would like, and that could potentially produce a little bit of a hangover as we go into springtime, but at least we're trending in the right direction as far as this event is concerned. I also got the latest Climate Prediction Center ENSO probabilities, if you will, for the next several months. So these blue bars indicate probabilities that we're going to see La Nina conditions. The gray bars, we'd be in neutral. The red bars, El Nino. So over here on the right, this blue bar right here for January, February, March, we're already in La Nina. We're probably still going to be in it through the remainder of this month and at least in the first part of March. But after that, look at the probabilities getting cut for March, April, May, way down here, okay, into about 33 or 32%. After that, it's interesting to see some of these probabilities actually come back up in the blue category for September, October, and November. I'm not exactly sure what this is going to mean for us. What I'm focusing on is this right here, okay? Those gray bars indicate generally neutral conditions as we go through the heart of this upcoming warm season and our growing season. So those are some things that I'm watching closely to see how quickly this goes away and how fast we transition into those neutral categories. One thing that I do have a little bit of a problem with, this is a graphic from the Bureau of Meteorology. It's looking at the same thing. You're forecasting how quickly this La Nina is going away. The green line is the mean of all these gray lines right here. And we're on the trend upwards, but look what happens here. You see that little sidestep, okay? In terms of what the sea surface temperature anomalies do for March and April, that to me indicates that the La Nina may not completely go away by that time. We're trending in the right direction, but we still have a little bit of a hangover there before we go completely over here into this quadrant where our sea surface temperatures actually end up above average, and that would be by June and July. So this transition, if you will, is going to have an impact in terms of how our weather behaves over the next several months, and that's what I'm going to show you right now with our seasonal forecast model update. All right, this is the upper level weather pattern as it's forecast by the Euromodel for the month of February. And I know we're about halfway through, but it's been doing a good job placing that ridge of high pressure right there and the trough of low pressure right here. This configuration allows this to happen, okay? It allows cold air to come down from the north frequently, and it doesn't allow for sustained warm-ups. That's likely going to be the forecast, as I showed you, for the remainder of February. And what happens is in March is we double down on that. We actually see that ridge back up a little bit up here, okay? The trough situated right here, all right? So what the weather pattern is doing is carving this out like this, okay? It keeps Western Canada, the Pacific Northwest, and the Northern Rockies colder and stormy during the course of March. And farther south, this is a west to east flow right here. I do not like that at all, okay? I would much rather see a trough dig down into this area and be placed somewhere about right there. Because what that would mean, we would have storms kicking out of the southwest and impacting the western, southern, and central plain states with better moisture prospects. As it stands right now, and I'll erase this for you, with this kind of west to east flow that's going to come through here, it's going to be hard to get storms to dig in to the southwest part of the country. And I still think that that's going to help facilitate dryness really in this quadrant. Okay. Right through here. Those are the areas that I'm concerned about. And you'll see that here in just a second. For April, we still have somewhat of an artifact of that weather pattern. Okay. With the high right there, a little bit of a trough digging in through here. Okay. But the thing with this is that the pattern is still favoring west to east through here. That is not a wet pattern for us in the west and southwest part of the country. In fact, you could even put a little secondary area of high pressure right there, just based on the higher heights and that would certainly not be good for us. Okay, the storm track would favor areas mainly up to the north with this. So let's look at the precipitation anomaly forecast for those months right there, and I'll look even beyond that in a second. This is what it had for February, and it did a really nice job with this moisture corridor that came into California up in through the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies. And for the most part, it's done a good job with this corridor here being wetter than average. This area has largely been drier. It's doing a nice job there. The one miss it might have is these areas a little bit farther up here to the north, where they're going to get some better moisture, I think, over the next week or so. But in general, it has the right idea for February. It had the right idea for February. For March, it largely has the same thing. We are wetter than average northwest. We are wetter than average here, and we are drier than average right through this corridor here. Okay, Southwest, Texas, Colorado, all up here. I'm still a little bit skeptical how far north this is going to get the dryness, but I still think, again, Southwest Kansas, the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, most of Texas is probably trending toward drier than average conditions for the month of March. We also see that dryness expand during February across most of the western United States. And really, if you draw a line like that, okay, Sioux Falls, Omaha, east of Wichita, east of Oklahoma City, and Dallas, east of that area ends up likely wetter than average. Okay, for the month of April. Anything west of there, especially where you're seeing some of these darker browns, likely has a tendency to end up drier than average. That does include the western 2/3 of Kansas, Oklahoma, western Oklahoma, West Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and you see the browns everywhere else. For May, still kind of the same story, but look at this. Some of the more significant dry areas start showing up here across eastern Nebraska, Wyoming. We've got some significant ones here in south central Kansas. We are still dry in this corridor here. All right, that's for May. If we go to June, we start to break that down a little bit. Again, this line and eastward, okay, better moisture. That's what we're seeing right now with this model. Areas farther west, not so good. The one thing that I am encouraged about here, okay, and I think this is something, look at this green tongue that's coming northward like that. That is an early season monsoon. It makes it as far north as southern Arizona and southwest New Mexico. Okay, that would be an early monsoon onset. And that trend continues. You can kind of see it right here. All right, even into July. I know there's some brown on the map here, especially in this section right here and across parts of Texas. But if we can get that monsoonal moisture up here, it does well for us in August. And you see that trend coming northward like this. So we turn off wetter across most of Kansas, most of Oklahoma, most of the western 2/3 of Texas, certainly for the month of August. So I know that's a long ways out there. I know we have some things to wrestle with until we get there, primarily the impact of what a dry spring would mean for us. But if I had to just look at this kind of like an El Nino or the La Nina transition that's ongoing and what the models are saying, then yes, I would say for a large part of the plains, especially the farther southwest you go, drier early, better prospects of it being wetter later. I didn't say wet, I said wetter later. Okay, let's look at the NMME model for the month of March, and it's largely going to show you kind of the same thing. We're wetter northwest and up here, and this corridor here obviously ends up being drier than average where it has been. Okay, very La Nina-like right there for the month of March. If we go to April, kind of the same story. There's still wetter than average conditions, or at least average the farther northwest and northeast you go. We are drier for the wet, really along, okay, at least in the plains, right here, along and west of that line. that's where we really set up to be drier than average and likely down here along parts of the Gulf Coast. Although I'm not as convinced about the Gulf Coast as I am a little bit farther to the west. Okay. If we look at May, same story. This area here likely struggles with the dryness. Okay. Most of Kansas, not bad. All right. The farther southwest you go, that's where the drier signal is. That trend continues largely in June, but some of this dryness, notice that it expands a little bit farther eastward here. Okay. Almost to the Missouri Valley and even into eastern Kansas, parts of Oklahoma. And what I think that is a reflection of, and you'll see this kind of continue, is that if we end up, okay, watch my line here, if we end up colder than average right here off the west coast of North America, what that does is it sets up for dryness here in the center part of the country. All right. You get an extension of the dryness that comes out of Canada and it impacts the Corn Belt. Areas farther west start to be under the influence of that monsoon, much like that. Okay. And then if we go into August, you see that again, that extension of dryness coming out of Canada into parts of the Central Plains and Corn Belt. That forecast, at least that part of it, is still yet to be determined. But there are some things in the modeling that I think that if you have interest in the Corn Belt, you might have to pay attention to that. And I know I'm going to be paying attention to that for you. But it's certainly something to watch. We could take it a step further and go into September. Again, I know this is a long ways out there, but you still see some of that dryness up across the north, and then not so much down here across Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. All right. So even with the NMME model, depending on where you're located, all right, it's still favoring farther west and southwest you go, drier than average early, and then we break out of that at least a little bit later as some of that dryness spreads to the north and to the northeast. Okay. I'm sure you'll have questions. If you do, please don't hesitate to ask. You know how to contact me via my phone or email. You can go to my website right here at brianbledsoeweather.com. You can obviously chat with me right there. There are many ways to get a hold of me, but that's what I'm thinking for right now. This pivot, if you will, from La Nina to at least neutral conditions is a very important one. It's important because it's really crucial that we get out of the La Nina episode. The problem with that is I still think the overlying kind of flavor to the Pacific Ocean is still going to be cold, even if La Nina weakens and goes away like it looks like it's going to. So it's not exactly all roses for us, as you saw clearly there across parts of the plains, at least during the springtime. But if nothing else, hopefully we can back end some of this stuff with some moisture a little bit later. But it's very important that we obviously have the submoisture profile that a lot of us do, because I think that subsoil profile is going to be used as a bridge for us to kind of skate through some of this dryness. And hopefully we can get some spotty timely rains here and there that it can at least help us out going forward. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But if I don't hear from you again, I'll be chatting with you soon coming up in March. Be well.